The static crackled first, a burst of digital snow that clawed at the sterile air of the Tactical Operations Center. Then came the voice, strained and breathless, cutting through the low hum of servers and cooling fans. TOC, this is Alpha 1. Ghost can't get a bead. The wind is a bastard up here. We are pinned, I repeat, pinned. HVT is still inside the primary structure. Colonel Madsen leaned forward, his knuckles white on the edge of the command console. On the main screen, a satellite feed showed a cluster of mud-brick buildings nestled in a narrow, treacherous valley. Red icons marked the positions of SEAL Team Alpha, pinned down behind a low stone wall. Blue icons, far too many of them, swarmed around the compound, representing the enemy combatants. A single, blinking gold icon marked the high-value target, a notorious bomb maker named Al-Khorasani. Ghost, what's your status? Madsen barked into his headset, his voice a low growl of controlled impatience. The reply came from the team's designated marksman, a man considered a legend in the sniper community. Negative TOC. Wind is gusting 30, maybe 40 miles per hour through this funnel. It's swirling. I'm getting updrafts and downdrafts sometimes in the same second. I've taken 3 shots. All 3 flew wide. I can't risk hitting the structure and bringing it down on the HVT. Madsen swore under his breath, a sharp, violent sound. The mission was falling apart. 47 minutes until their exfil window closed. If Alpha Team wasn't clear by then, they'd be stranded until dawn. A death sentence in that valley. Every man in the TOC felt the pressure clamp down, a physical weight in the pit of the stomach. The air grew thick with unspoken fear. The best sniper in the Naval Special Warfare Development Group couldn't make the shot. It was an impossible problem. Across the room, away from the glowing screens and frantic energy, Sergeant Elena Reyes finished calibrating a fuel pressure gauge for a Black Hawk that wasn't scheduled to fly for another 6 hours. She was a forward arming and refueling point technician, a ghost of a different sort. Her days were spent in the grit and dust of the flight line, smelling of JP-8 and hydraulic fluid. She was background noise, a necessary but unseen cog in the war machine. But she had been listening, her focus shifting from the delicate needle of the gauge to the desperate cadence of the comms traffic. Her posture, usually relaxed and economical, tightened. She placed the gauge carefully on her workbench and walked silently toward the controlled chaos of the TOC. She stopped just inside the doorway, her eyes scanning the topographical map on the secondary screen, her gaze lingering on the wind speed indicators that flickered erratically. She could feel that wind, even from here. She knew its patterns, the way it scoured the high ridges and eddied in the low basins. She had watched it every day for the 2 years she'd been stationed at this forward operating base, learning its moods and its violence. It was a living thing. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through a lull in the comms. Madsen didn't turn. "Not now. Colonel, there's a secondary overwatch position," she pressed, taking a step forward. "The North Ridge. They call it Windshear Alley. The prevailing wind splits there. It creates a pocket of still air on the leeward face, just below the summit." Madsen finally turned, his eyes narrowing. He saw a sergeant in a dusty, oil-stained utility uniform. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face was a stoic mask, giving nothing away. "And who the hell are you?" Specialist Calloway, a young comms tech, jumped in. "Sergeant Reyes, sir. She's with the FARP detachment." Madsen's lips curled into a sneer of pure disbelief. "A refueler? You're giving me tactical advice, Sergeant?" He waved a dismissive hand. "Get back to your pumps. The adults are working here." The other officers in the TOC shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Reyes's gaze. The dismissal was brutal, absolute. Reyes didn't flinch. Her expression remained unchanged, but a flicker of something ancient and hard passed through her eyes. "The wind there, sir," she said, her tone still even. "It flows over the ridge like water over a stone. The spot I'm talking about is in the eddy. It's a stable firing platform. Unconventional, but stable. I have the best sniper in the United States military telling me a shot is impossible." Madsen shot back, his voice rising. And you, a grease monkey, are telling me you know better? Get out of my TOC. She held his gaze for a beat longer, a silent challenge that he refused to acknowledge. Then she gave a single, sharp nod, turned on her heel and walked out. The heavy door hissed shut behind her, leaving Madsen to stare at the screen where his best men were about to die. He shook his head, annoyed at the interruption, and tried to focus on finding a solution that didn't involve impossible shots or advice from the motor pool. He had a team to save and he was running out of time. The blinking red icons on the screen seemed to multiply, closing in on his men like wolves. The wind howled through the comms, a mocking laugh from the mountain itself. Reyes walked away from the TOC with a calm, measured stride that betrayed none of the urgency burning in her chest. The colonel's dismissal was a familiar sting, a dull ache she had learned to ignore over a decade of service in roles that made her invisible. She wasn't angry. Anger was a luxury, a fire that consumed oxygen needed for other things. She was focused. Specialist Calloway caught up to her just as she reached the crosspath between the command post and the barracks. "Sergeant," he panted, his young face a mixture of awe and anxiety. "You really think that's possible? That spot?" "It's possible," she said, her voice low and certain. She didn't slow down. Her destination was clear in her mind. "But, Colonel Madsen." "The colonel is looking at a screen," Reyes stated, her gaze fixed on the corrugated steel building of the base armory. "I'm looking at the mountain." She stopped and turned to him. "Calloway, I need you to do something for me. I need a rifle." The young specialist stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. This went far beyond offering unsolicited advice. This was a breach of protocol so profound it could end both their careers. "A rifle? Sergeant, I can't. I'm just comms. I don't have that authority." "You have access to the requisitions logs," Reyes said, her voice dropping into a register that was both a request and a command. "Find me an M40A5, one that's been logged for maintenance check, something sitting in the back, and a case of 762mm M118 long range." Calloway swallowed hard. He had seen the look in her eyes back in the TOC. It wasn't the look of a mechanic. It was something else, something he'd only seen in the eyes of the Tier 1 operators who passed through the FOB. It was a look of absolute lethal competence. He made a decision. "The armory," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Follow me." Inside the armory, the air was cool and smelled of gun oil and metal. Racks of M4s and saws stood in perfect, gleaming rows. On a far wall, behind a locked cage, were the precision rifles. The sleek, modern MK22s, the heavy 50 caliber M107s. The armorer, a grizzled master sergeant named Gunny Tate, looked up from his workbench. "Calloway, what do you want?" His voice was gravel. Then he saw Reyes. "And who's this?" "Sergeant Reyes needs to inspect a weapon, Gunny," Calloway said, trying to sound official. "An M40A5, logged for recalibration." Gunny Tate raised a skeptical eyebrow but shuffled to a computer, typed for a moment, and grunted. "Got one in the back. Been there for months. Marine Corps rifle. Don't know how it ended up here." He disappeared into a back room and returned a moment later with a long, dust-covered Pelican case. He slammed it onto the counter. "There. Recalibrate away." Reyes didn't say a word. She unlatched the case. The foam inside was yellowed, but nestled within was not a standard-issue rifle. This M40A5 was different. The synthetic stock was scarred and pitted from hard use, but the pistol grip and cheek rest were wrapped in worn, dark brown leather, polished smooth by a hand long gone. The barrel was free-floated, and the Schmidt and Bender scope mounted on top was an older model, but its glass was pristine. It was a relic, an artist's tool, not a soldier's weapon. It was her grandfather's rifle. He had been a legend in his own time, a Marine Scout sniper in Vietnam with confirmed kills at distances the brass refused to believe. He had taught her to shoot, not on a range, but in the high desert winds of New Mexico, teaching her to read the mirage and feel the air on her skin. She lifted the rifle. It settled into her shoulder as if it were an extension of her own bones. She worked the bolt. The action was smooth, tight, a masterpiece of custom gunsmithing. It was a sound she knew better than her own heartbeat. "I need a mag and a box of M118LR, she said to Tate, her voice devoid of any emotion. Tate, who had been watching her with a cynical eye, saw the way she held the rifle. He saw the familiarity, the reverence. His expression softened. He reached under the counter, pulled out a box of the requested match-grade ammunition, and pushed it across the counter. "Good hunting," he said, his voice quiet. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Reyes nodded, loaded a single 5-round magazine, grabbed the box, and turned to leave. She didn't take the case. The rifle was in her hands now, where it belonged. The path Reyes chose was not a path at all. It was a goat trail, a barely there scar of scree and loose rock that snaked up the back of the North Ridge. She moved with a purpose that bordered on preternatural, her boots finding purchase on stones that should have crumbled. Her body angled perfectly against the slope. The rifle was slung across her back, a familiar weight that balanced her movements. The air grew thinner, colder. The wind, which had been a persistent nuisance at the base, became a physical opponent. It tore at her, a solid wall of force that threatened to peel her from the mountainside. This was Windshear Alley. Down below, in the valley, the wind was a chaotic vortex. But up here, the geography of the ridge created a bizarre and dangerous aerodynamic phenomenon. The main current of wind, traveling west to east, slammed into the mountain's peak and split, accelerating as it was forced around the massive rock formation. One current screamed over the top. The other scoured the western face. To reach the spot she knew, she had to cross the exposed spine of the ridge, a 50-meter stretch of knife-edge granite where the wind speed could double in an instant. Reyes paused at the edge of the spine, crouching behind a rocky outcrop. She pulled her neck gaiter up over her nose and mouth, the fabric already stiffening with frozen condensation from her breath. She watched the dust and small pebbles being ripped from the ground, flying horizontally past her. She didn't time the gusts. That was a fool's game. The gusts were constant. She studied the flow, looking for the rhythm, the pulse of the mountain's breath. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, a memory from 20 years before. "Don't fight the wind, Elena. You'll lose. You let it tell you where the still places are. You listen with your skin." She took a deep breath, held it, and broke from cover. She didn't run. She moved in a low, powerful crouch, her body a study in tension and balance. Each step was deliberate, a controlled fall. The wind hit her like a fist, trying to tear the rifle from her back, trying to shove her off the narrow precipice and into the 1,000-foot drop below. Her thigh muscles burned, and her lungs screamed for air she couldn't afford to gasp. The sound was deafening, a physical roar that vibrated through the rock and into her bones. It was the sound of the world being torn apart. For 30 seconds that stretched into an eternity, she was in the heart of the storm. Then, as suddenly as it began, she was through. She half fell, half slid down the leeward side of the spine, landing in a shallow depression no bigger than a coffin. The roar of the wind was instantly muffled, replaced by a strange, hollow quiet. The main currents were flowing a dozen feet above her head and to her side, creating a pocket of relative calm. It wasn't still, small eddies still tugged at her uniform, but it was manageable. It was the eye of the hurricane. She crawled to the edge of the depression, unslung the M40, and deployed its bipod, seating the metal feet firmly into the rocky ground. She pulled a small, sand-filled bag from her cargo pocket and settled the stock of the rifle onto it, creating a perfectly stable 3-point platform. She was 1,400 meters from the target compound, at a higher angle than Ghost's position. The view through the Schmidt and Bender scope was crystal clear. The mirage, which had been a boiling nightmare from the SEAL's position, was a gentle shimmer here. She could see the individual bricks in the wall where Alpha Team was taking cover. She could see the muzzle flashes from the enemy positions. She could see everything. She chambered around, the click of the bolt echoing in her small sanctuary of silence. She rested her cheek against the cool, worn leather of the stock. Felt like coming home. Through the powerful glass of the scope, the scene below was a diorama of controlled chaos. Reyes swept the compound methodically, her eyes ignoring the frantic movement and focusing on the points of lethal influence. She saw the seals, their blue icons now a real-world tableau of desperation. They were returning fire sparingly, conserving ammunition. Their movements were tight, economical, the actions of men who knew they were in a fatal funnel. Her gaze drifted from them to the source of their problem. On the flat roof of a two-story building overlooking the stone wall, a PKM machine gun was placed behind a stack of sandbags. The gunner was laying down disciplined, 3-second bursts, kicking up dust and stone chips inches from the SEALs' heads. He was the anchor of the enemy's attack, the linchpin holding Alpha Team in place. He was her first target. She rested the crosshairs of the reticle on the sliver of space between the gunner's helmet and the top of the sandbag wall. Her mind became a cold, biological computer. Distance: 1,412 meters. Wind: from her 9 o'clock, but broken and unpredictable down in the valley. Here, in her pocket, it was a mild 5-mile-per-hour drift, right to left. But the bullet would travel through 3 different wind zones on its way to the target. She watched the heat haze rising from the rocks, the lazy swirl of a dust devil in the compound courtyard, the way the smoke from the PKM's muzzle drifted. In the TOC, Matson's voice was tight. "Ghost, can you suppress that PKM? Just give them enough room to breathe." "Negative, TOC." The sniper's voice crackled back, thick with frustration. "I'm holding 2 mils for windage, and it's still not enough. The updraft is throwing the round high every time." Reyes adjusted the elevation turret on her scope. Click, 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 36 clicks up. She then adjusted the windage knob. 8 clicks left. It was an intuitive guess, a calculation based not on data but on a lifetime of feeling the air. It was a shot based on faith. Faith in her grandfather's teachings, faith in the rifle, faith in herself. She took the borrowed radio from her belt. She didn't know the proper call signs, the formal language of the Tier 1 operators. She kept it simple. "Alpha 1, this is Overwatch," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Stand by." Confused voice came back. "Who is this? Identify." Reyes ignored him. She had the shot. Her world narrowed to the circle of light in the scope. The gunner's head, the reticle, her breath. She exhaled slowly, letting the air leave her lungs until they were empty and still. The body's natural pause, the space between heartbeats. In that silent, perfect moment, she applied 27 pounds of pressure to the trigger. The M40 bucked against her shoulder, a familiar and comforting shove. The report was a sharp crack, swallowed instantly by the vastness of the mountain. She never lost sight of the target through the scope. She saw the vapor trail of the 175-grain bullet, a faint, corkscrewing line cutting through the air. For a fraction of a second, it seemed to be flying too far to the left, a miss. Then, in the last 100 meters, a downdraft caught it, pushing it down and right, exactly as she had predicted. The effect was not dramatic. There was no spray of blood, no theatrical collapse. The PKM gunner's head simply snapped back, and he vanished behind the sandbags. The machine gun fell silent. For a full 5 seconds, there was absolute silence on the comms. Then Ghost's voice, stripped of all its earlier frustration, came through, laced with pure, unadulterated shock. "Jesus Christ, Tosi. Did you see that? Shot came from the North Ridge. Perfect hit. Who the hell is on the North Ridge?" In the TOC, every eye swiveled from the main screen to Colonel Madsen. His face was a mask of stunned disbelief. He stared at the topographical map, at the blinking cursor he had assumed was a sensor glitch on the ridge they called Windshear Alley. "Who is Overwatch?" he demanded, his voice a hoarse whisper. Specialist Calloway, who had been tracking the unauthorized radio transmission, looked up from his console, a slow, triumphant grin spreading across his face. "It's Reyes, sir," he said, the words dropping into the silent room like stones. It's Sergeant Reyes. Madsen stared at the young specialist, then back at the screen where the previously untouchable machine gun nest was now silent. The impossible had just happened. The refueler. The grease monkey. He felt a cold knot of dread and awe form in his stomach. He had dismissed her, mocked her, and she had just saved his men from certain death with a single impossible shot. The entire dynamic of the battle, and of his understanding of the people under his command, had just been irrevocably altered. The enemy, however, was already adapting. The silence from the PKM was a signal to them not of defeat, but of a new, unexpected threat. They would react, and they would react with violence. Reyes's private war was just beginning. The enemy's response was swift and brutal. The sudden silencing of their key support weapon told them exactly one thing. There was a new shooter, and they were dangerously effective. Within a minute, the dull thump-thump-thump of mortar tubes echoed from behind the main compound. The insurgents weren't fools. They couldn't see Reyes, but they knew the general location of the shot. They began to walk the rounds up the north ridge, bracketing the area, turning the mountainside into a hellscape of rock and shrapnel. The first round landed 500 meters below her position, a puff of brown dust and black smoke. The next was closer, 300 meters. Reyes didn't move. She watched them through her scope, judging the pattern, the skill of the mortar team. They were good. They were using the terrain echoes to mask the exact location of their tubes. Overwatch, this is TOC. Madsen's voice crackled over her radio. The condescension was gone, replaced by a raw, urgent concern. We are seeing mortar fire targeting your position. You need to egress. I repeat, pull back now. Reyes watched another round impact, this one only 100 meters away. The concussion vibrated through the rock beneath her. Small pebbles rained down around her small perch. Negative, TOC, she replied, her voice as steady as the rifle stock against her cheek. Alpha is still compromised. I have work to do. Sergeant, Madsen pleaded, the use of her rank a peace offering, an apology. They will walk those rounds right on top of you. Let them try, she said. Her focus was absolute. The mortars were a problem, but not the primary one. Her mission was to dismantle the enemy's ability to fight, to create a corridor of safety for the men below. She scanned the compound again. The enemy fighters, emboldened by the mortar fire they believed was suppressing the new threat, began to move more aggressively. One of them, a man with a radio on his back, climbed onto the roof of a smaller building, pointing up toward her ridge, directing the fire. He was a spotter. He had to go. A mortar shell screamed overhead and exploded 50 meters behind her, showering her with dirt and stone fragments. The blast was deafening. In the split second of chaos, as dust filled the air, she lined up the shot. The spotter was looking through binoculars, feeling safe in the maelstrom. Reyes centered the crosshairs on his chest. Another calculation, quicker this time. The wind was the same, the distance slightly less. She held her breath, ignoring the ringing in her ears, and squeezed the trigger. The second shot was lost in the echo of the mortar explosion. Through the scope, she saw the man with the radio simply crumple, his binoculars falling from his hands and clattering onto the rooftop. He slid down the gentle slope of the roof and disappeared over the edge. The mortar fire, now lacking a forward observer, became less accurate, the rounds landing more erratically. In the TOC, a collective breath was released. Second target down, Calloway announced, his voice filled with reverence. She's using the mortar impacts to mask her own shots. Sir, she's hunting them. Madsen could only nod, his eyes glued to the screen. His skepticism had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, burgeoning trust. He keyed his mic again, his tone now one of a commander speaking to a vital asset. Overwatch, what do you need? Her reply was instantaneous and stark. Silence. She needed to focus. The enemy was adapting again. Realizing their support by fire was failing, they shifted to a direct assault weapon. A two-man team emerged from a doorway, one carrying an RPG-7, the other carrying the spare rockets. They were making a run for a corner that would give them a clear line of sight on Alpha Team's exposed flank. There was no time for a careful, calculated shot. This was instinct. Reyes swung the rifle, acquiring the RPG gunner as he ran. She didn't have time to dial the turrets. She used the mil-dots in her reticle, a technique for rapid engagement known as holding over. She put the third below the crosshairs on his center mass, leading him by a full body width, a running target at over 1,000 meters in a variable wind. It was a shot that shouldn't even be attempted. She fired. The third shot hit the gunner in the hip. He didn't drop. He spun and fell, the RPG launcher flying from his grasp and skittering across the dirt. His assistant, seeing his partner go down, immediately dropped the spare rockets and scrambled for the launcher. He was 10 feet away from it. Reyes worked the bolt on the M40 with fluid speed. Eject. Chamber. Reacquire. The assistant had the launcher in his hands. He was turning. The fourth shot was even faster than the third. Took him high in the back. He collapsed forward onto the weapon, silencing it for good. 4 shots, 4 critical targets eliminated. The offensive capability of the enemy force was now broken. They were disorganized, confused, being picked apart by a ghost on the mountain they couldn't see and couldn't kill. Inside the compound, the HVT Al-Khorasani realized his protection was evaporating. He burst from the main building, flanked by 2 bodyguards, making a desperate sprint for a Toyota Hilux parked near the main gate. This was the endgame. TOC, HVT is on the move, came the call from Alpha 1. He's trying to bug out. Reyes was already on him. The truck was 1,500 meters away, her furthest target yet. The HVT was diving for the passenger door. She had seconds. Overwatch. Can you stop that vehicle? Madsen asked, almost praying. Reyes didn't answer. Her world was the reticle, the fleeing figure, and the wind. This was the shot her grandfather had trained her for. The one that separated the marksman from the master. Feel the earth spin, Elena. At this range, it matters Coriolis effect. She held high for the drop, left for the wind, and another half-mil left for the rotation of the planet. It was a whisper of an adjustment, a ghost in the calculation. She put the crosshairs not on the man, but on the empty space in front of the truck's door where he would be in 2 seconds. She exhaled. The world went still. She fired. The 5th and final round from her magazine left the barrel. It was the culmination of everything. Her heritage, her training, her ingress, her calm defiance. The bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds. Through the scope, Reyes watched the HVT's hand reach for the door handle. The round arrived first. It struck him in the chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him against the side of the truck, where he slid to the ground in a lifeless heap. The 2 bodyguards, seeing their charge killed before their eyes, panicked, abandoned his body, and fled into the maze of alleys. The battle was over. 5 shots, 5 kills. Mission complete. The sudden collapse of the enemy's command structure was total. With their leaders and heavy weapons eliminated in a span of less than 3 minutes, the remaining fighters lost all cohesion. What was once a coordinated attack devolved into a panic scramble for self-preservation. Men who had been pressing the assault on Alpha Team now broke cover, running for the safety of the surrounding hills. They were no longer soldiers. They were just scared men trying to escape a wrath they could not comprehend. From her perch, Reyes watched the rout unfold. Her job now shifted from elimination to control. She was no longer a hunter. She was a shepherd, and her flock was the battered SEAL team below. She chambered the first round from a fresh magazine. The M40's bolt slid home with a satisfying, oily click. Alpha 1, this is Overwatch, she transmitted. Her voice still a low, calm monotone that belied the fury she had just unleashed. The HVT is down. A confirmed kill. Hostile forces are in full retreat. I will cover your movement. Roger that, Overwatch. The reply came back, the voice of the Alpha Team leader filled with a mixture of relief and awe. Moving to secure the HVT and begin exfil prep. We owe you 1 inch. Reyes didn't acknowledge the gratitude. She was already working. A pair of fighters tried to set up a hasty defensive position in a doorway that overlooked the SEAL's planned route of egress. She didn't aim to kill them. A kill shot was a finality. A suppressing shot was a tool. She put a round into the wall a foot above their heads. The concrete exploded, showering them with dust and fragments. They abandoned the position instantly, disappearing back into the building. She saw another group trying to rally near the southern edge of the compound. They were more than a mile away, barely visible figures. She didn't fire at them. Instead, she targeted a rusty fuel barrel standing next to their position. The 762mm round punched through the thin metal, and while it didn't explode, the sudden, violent rupture and spray of diesel was enough to send the men scattering like quail. It was a psychological blow, a message sent across the valley. I can touch you wherever you are. There is no safe place. For the next 10 minutes, she was the undisputed master of the valley. Her rifle was not just a weapon. It was a conductor's baton, and she was orchestrating the enemy's retreat. Every time a hostile element threatened to coalesce or block the SEAL's path, a single, precisely placed round would disrupt them, breaking their formation and their will. She wasn't firing a barrage. She was conducting a surgical operation on the battlefield itself, cutting away threats with methodical precision. Below, Alpha Team moved with renewed confidence. They secured Al-Khorasani's body, grabbing his satchel and laptop for intelligence, and then began a tactical withdrawal back to their designated extraction point. They moved smoothly, professionally, their path cleared by an unseen guardian angel on the ridge. They could hear the singular, sharp crack of her rifle echoing periodically through the valley, a sound that to them was no longer a threat, but a promise of safety. Each crack was another obstacle removed, another danger neutralized. In the TOC, the tension had been replaced by a stunned, reverent silence. The operators and officers watched the screen as the blue icons of Alpha Team moved unimpeded through the compound, while the red icons scattered and vanished. They were watching a masterclass in battlefield dominance, executed by one person with a bolt-action rifle. Exfil birds are 5 minutes out, Calloway announced softly. Alpha is green. They're in the clear. Colonel Madsen stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back. He watched the lone, blinking cursor on the north ridge. It hadn't moved. It was a fixed point of impossible power in a world of chaos. He had been so wrong. His entire understanding of warfare, of rank and role and expertise, had been built on a rigid foundation that Sergeant Reyes had just shattered with 5 rifle shots. He had seen the best special operators in the world fail, only to be saved by a woman he had dismissed as a mechanic. The humility of it was a cold, heavy weight in his chest. He finally keyed his mic, his voice quiet and heavy with unspoken respect. Overwatch, he said. Alpha Team is clear. Your job is done. Get yourself home, Sergeant. There was a pause. Then the calm voice came back one last time. Roger, TOC. Overwatch out. Reyes slowly pulled her eye away from the scope. The valley below was quiet now, the dust beginning to settle. Her work was finished. She began the painstaking process of packing her gear for the long, lonely climb back down. The sun was a bruised purple and orange smear on the horizon when the helicopters returned. The SEALs of Alpha Team disembarked, weary and battered but alive. Their gear was caked in dust, their faces grim with exhaustion and the adrenaline hangover of a mission that had almost been their last. As medics swarmed to check them over, the team's sniper, callsign Ghost, broke away from the group. He was a tall, lean man, his face hidden behind a beard and sunglasses, but the purpose in his stride was unmistakable. He wasn't headed for the debriefing room or the medical tent. He was headed for the armory. He found Reyes there, just as she was handing the M40 back to Gunny Tate. The old armorer took the rifle with a reverence he usually reserved for museum pieces, his eyes lingering on Reyes for a moment before he took the weapon to its storage rack. Reyes turned and found herself face to face with the man whose legend she had just inadvertently eclipsed. Ghost said nothing for a long moment. He looked at her, then at the rifle now resting in its cradle, then back at her. He had a reputation for being a man of few words, but now he seemed to be searching for ones that didn't exist. "I was on that scope for an hour," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "I ran every number. Doped the wind. Read the mirage. I'm telling you, that first shot. It wasn't possible. The crosswind, the updraft. It's 100-to-1 shot." On a calm day, he shook his head slowly. "Nobody makes that shot," he paused, his gaze intense. "Nobody." Reyes simply stood there, her expression unreadable. She just gave a slight shrug, as if to say it was nothing. "The next 4, Ghost continued, his voice softer now, filled with a professional's awe. "The spotter, the RPG team, the HVT on the run. That wasn't a fluke. That was a system. That was mastery." He took off his sunglasses, and she saw the raw respect in his eyes. He extended a hand. "I don't know who you are, Sergeant, but you're the best I've ever seen. Or heard." Reyes took his hand. Her grip was firm, her hand calloused from work, not from a pistol grip. "My grandfather taught me to shoot," she said quietly, the first personal detail she had offered anyone. "He was a scout sniper with 1st Marines. They called him Witch because he made shots that defied physics." She let go of his hand, a faint, sad smile touching her lips for a fraction of a second. "Guess it runs in the family." Ghost stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. The old Marine rifle, the impossible wind calls, the call sign. "Witch," he repeated, the name a revelation. He nodded slowly, a deep and profound understanding passing between them. "Copy that, Witch." Loud and clear, he put his sunglasses back on, gave her a short, sharp nod of respect that was more meaningful than any medal, and walked away. From the doorway of the TOC 50 yards away, Colonel Madsen had watched the entire exchange. He saw the handshake. He saw the look on Ghost's face, a look of deference he had never seen the sniper give to anyone, not even a general. The weight of his earlier dismissal pressed down on him again, heavier this time. He turned to Specialist Calloway, who was standing beside him. "Calloway," Madsen said, his voice quiet, almost strained, "pull Sergeant Elena Reyes's file. Her entire 201 file. I want to see everything. Her training scores, her previous assignments, any commendations, any reprimands. All of it." "Right away, sir," Calloway said, trying to hide his satisfaction. "And get me the Chief of Staff for Marine Corps Special Operations Command on a secure line," Madsen added as an afterthought. "I think we may have one of their assets working in my motor pool." He turned and walked back into the darkness of the TOC, leaving Calloway to hurry off to his terminal. The official recognition was beginning, a slow, bureaucratic wave in the wake of a tidal force. But for Reyes, the quiet handshake from a fellow master of the craft was the only acknowledgement that truly mattered. The desert air cooled quickly as the last vestiges of sunlight vanished behind the jagged peaks. The frantic energy of the day bled away, replaced by the mundane, rhythmic hum of the FOB at night. The generators thrummed, casting long, distorted shadows from light towers that bathed the gravel paths in a harsh yellow glow. At the edge of the flight line, Sergeant Reyes sat alone on an empty ammunition crate outside the FARP tent. The M40A5 lay disassembled on a clean canvas cloth in front of her. She was cleaning it. The scent of CLP solvent, sharp and familiar, hung in the air. With practiced, meticulous movements, she ran a cleaning rod with a wet patch down the barrel, pulling out the grime and carbon fouling from the 5 rounds she had fired. Each component was wiped down, inspected, and lightly oiled. The bolt, the trigger assembly, the magazine housing. It was a ritual, a way of coming down from the intense, cold focus the mountain had demanded. It was a way of saying thank you and goodbye to the rifle that felt more a part of her than her own name. This was her resolution, her quiet ceremony of closure. The dust and the wind and the violence were being wiped away, leaving only clean, cool steel. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. She didn't look up, but her hands stilled for a moment. She knew the sound of those boots. Colonel Madsen stopped a few feet away. He was alone, no aide, no entourage. He stood in silence for a full minute, watching her hands work on the rifle. He saw the economy of her movements, the deep, ingrained knowledge in her touch. She wasn't just cleaning a weapon. She was caring for a sacred object. "Sergeant," he said finally. His voice was different now. Stripped of authority, stripped of arrogance. It was just the voice of a man. Reyes looked up. Her face was calm, her eyes reflecting the yellow light of the towers. She didn't offer a salute. They were beyond such formalities. "Sir," she acknowledged, her tone neutral. Madsen held out a small, ruggedized datapad. The screen glowed with the text of an official document. "I read your file," he said. "All of it. Distinguished honor graduate at Paris Island. Top of your class at the Scout Sniper Basic Course. Scored a perfect on the Hog's Tooth qualification. You were recruited for MARSOC selection," he paused, looking out toward the dark shape of the North Ridge. "Then you withdrew your name, requested a lateral move to aviation ground support. To refuel helicopters." He looked back at her, his eyes asking the question he wouldn't voice. "Why?" "My grandfather died," she said simply, offering no further explanation. The answer was all there in that one sentence. The legacy had become a burden, the gift a source of pain. She had tried to bury the witch. Madsen nodded slowly, understanding. He had seen it before. Warriors who walked away. He swiped a thumb across the datapad screen. "Your file has been amended," he said. "The official report states that an unidentified friendly asset provided sniper support from a classified location. But your personal file now includes a full, detailed after-action report of what you did today. It's been flagged for the attention of some very senior people at Quantico." He held the datapad out to her. "Your MOS is being reviewed. You won't be refueling helicopters for much longer. Unless you want to." Reyes looked at the datapad, then back at the colonel. She didn't take it. She just gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She picked up the bolt of the rifle and began wiping it with a soft cloth. Madsen stood there for another moment, feeling the inadequacy of his words, of his bureaucracy. He reached out, not to her but to the rifle. He hesitated, then placed his hand gently on the scarred, leather-wrapped stock. The worn wood was still faintly warm. It was a gesture of profound, silent respect, a commander touching the tool of his salvation. He held it there for a heartbeat, a silent communion, then withdrew his hand. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked back into the night, his own shadow long and solitary behind him. Reyes watched him go. When he was gone, she finished her work. She reassembled the rifle with the precision of a watchmaker. She worked the bolt one last time, the sound a crisp, final punctuation mark on the day's events. She wrapped the M40 in its canvas shroud, her dignity and her silence fully intact. The wind began to pick up again, a low whisper from the mountains, but this time, it felt different. It was no longer a thing to be fought or conquered. It was just the air she breathed. The night was quiet, and she was at peace.